Hello and welcome to week 8 of Senate GT 1807 Digital Preservation. This week is the second in our series of case studies about different kinds of digital collection workflows, piecing together why we do this kind of digital collection work, what are the components that we receive as part of it, and then what we do when we actually receive this stuff. So I put digitization second because although it is the bread and butter of a lot of digital collection development, it kind of overshadows everything else, and it starts to leak some of its logic into other collection workflows. And it is its own kind of work. It is different than born digital media. It's different than web archiving. It's different than a lot of things. And so it's very important to keep in mind that, although some of the processes that we do here seem like absolutely core and key, they are core and key to this process, and they are not applicable outside of this context at times. So keep that in mind as we're going through. Now, as a reminder, the setup for these case studies is I'm going to walk through some of the different ways that we see digitization happen. Then I'm going to talk about some of the common components that you will see as part of the material that you will receive from a digitization process. Then we're going to talk about the ingest workflow and what does reception look like, what does validation look like, what does repackaging look like, things like that. And then finally, a brief summary of how digitization is different from other kinds of digital collection workflows. All right, so jumping into what does this look like? Well, what digitization is it's the creation of a representation of an object as a digital file or files. And I think it's important to remember that we are creating a representation of something. So that means that this isn't preservation per se, because instead of transforming it or going forward with this thing, at the end of a digitization process, instead of just having the original object to preserve, well, now you have the original object to preserve and this new digital object that you created. So you've actually doubled your preservation responsibilities. It does have certain preservation aspects to it, that you are able to create this representation of the information in the original object that might have different preservability characteristics, accessibility characteristics, but at its core, it is not necessarily preservation, because it is actually doubling your workload when it comes to keeping your collections preserved. So let's talk about different kinds of digitization that we might see. And I think that brings home the point of how that some of this digitization, it feels more like access, some of it feels more like a preservation focus, but all of this in the end is just increasing the size of your digital collection. So what kind of types can we talk about? Well, the most common thing that you will see is sort of the item-by-item still image digitization. Cultural heritage organizations have a lot of flat media. We have books, we have papers, we have pictures, we have those types of things. And so to digitize it, we take a two-dimensional digital representation of it, which is a photo. And in many cases, this is done by either a flatbed scanner, but also a camera stand. Putting it on a flat table and having a camera permanently mounted and shooting down on that thing. So that's very common to do things like books and stuff like that. But when you're working at a large scale, you can also do things like mass still image digitization. So here's an image of a microfilm scanner. This thing can pump out thousands of images within an hour. The reels go flying by, and every reel I think has about 1,000 to 8,000 pages contained within, and it can process a reel in, I believe, under 10 minutes. So these things can be extraordinarily fast, and they double down on what was a previous supposed preservation reformatting technique, which was transforming your print collections, taking pictures of them and storing them on microfilm. Well, now it turns out the microfilm is less accessible than the original object, but it's still very convenient that you can scan the whole thing. So you can run a digitization program by reformatting your reformatted materials. Now, this is MEAPS, so the one that everybody here is probably most familiar with is audio and video digitization. This is an image of a common kind of setup. You get a rack. That rack has multiple kinds of playback decks for different formats. You have analog to digital converters because you have analog media that needs to be converted to a digital format. You have time-based correctors, which you can ask the people that run that more. I just know that I've seen them talked about a lot. You have scopes, you have monitors, all these things to make sure that the process of digitization is going well. And this has been a major push in this field because we know that to some extent our audio and video collections on physical media are becoming increasingly unavailable because of media degradation or knowledge loss or playback deck loss. So people are trying to make files because that's going to be more commonly accessible. All right, so the last one that I want to talk about is 3D digitization. So 3D digitization, what we have here is somebody using a handheld laser scanner and beaming this thing around, and then we get a three-dimensional representation of this object. So where a still image can give us a two-dimensional representation of an object and is really good for books and photos and things, and AV digitization can work well with time-based media, audio, video, etc. If you have 3D objects and you want to create a representation, you need the 3D scan. And we are just seeing the birth of this in terms of how much people want to do it. But yes, this is another form of digitization that is coming into our field. Now, I do want to point out that the purpose of digitization can go in a lot of different directions. It can be used as part of a preservation strategy because when you digitize something, you can make access available to the original object through that digitized version, which means that that original object is less exposed to constant use. It also means that you are negating the loss of playback equipment because you have played it back at least once and you've captured the results of that. It's also a access strategy because you can expand access. You can put it on the internet and have people be able to view this thing without having to come into your physical space. It's also a thing that allows people to manipulate the object in a way that they couldn't with an original thing, that they could, run it through AI algorithms or take clips of it and do video manipulations of it. Lots of kinds of things there. So digitization is just a process. The purpose that we use it for has preservation aspects to it. It has access aspects to it. But I think better to always keep it away from people, or be very clear that you are doing it for those reasons, and that it is not the end-all be-all of, we digitize it, so therefore it's preserved, and now we can do something else. You are having to engage with that object more over time, regardless of the reason that you do this for.